Well, it's Sunday, the day of rest. So I rested and now I'm all rested. Unlike some people, I don't consider going to church to be resting. If I want to rest, I rest in bed. And because my dog Francois Pierre is so good at resting in bed himself, he has made me, well, good because I try to follow his example. And largely, I do. But enough of that. So today I read an article by New York columnist Bret Stephens. So why did I read that column in the first place? Well, I don't know. Mainly because I was eating breakfast. I didn't have anything else to do. And I was mad at Francois and didn't want to talk to him, so I read this column. I shouldn't have. So I don't know if you know Bret Stephens. He holds himself out as a moderate. He's a Republican, but not a Trump supporter, and so on and so forth. And he's a bright guy. But he's like so many people, they get on this subject of Israel, and they just have no objectivity. Now, let me just tell you where I'm coming from first. Many of you know that. And that is that, well, first of all, let me read this. This is the part that really fried me. He says, here, he's talking about the 5 wars that Israel is fighting. He says the second war fuels and explains the first. It's about existence. Israel's most strident critics insist that the current conflict is about Palestinian existence, about Israel's alleged refusal to grant a Palestinian homeland. And this is the part that gets me. But that's a historically ignorant claim and a dishonest one. So, those of us who are vehemently anti-Israel are ignorant of history. You notice they never tell you how. Now here's the example he's putting out as being ignorant of history. He says, Israel agreed to a Palestinian authority in 1993, offered a Palestinian state in 2000, and vacated the Gaza Strip in 2008. So as far as Bret Stephens is concerned, that's the history. The history of those conflicts, the present modern day history of those conflicts, started about 1860 with the Suez Canal and Disraeli's relocating of Jews out of England over to Israel to accomplish 2 purposes. One, to get Jews out of England because they were very anti-Semitic in England at the time, including Disraeli, who claimed to be of Jewish descent, possibly was, but he was a fundamentalist Christian. And they didn't want any Jews in England, and so they had laws outlawing them, and they would try everything they could to get them out of there. So they sent them over to Israel. These were from England. And the second thing was they were building the Suez Canal. He was a heavy investor in the Suez Canal. Actually, England was, but it was a private company. And he wanted to have a base of operations, so in the event that there was conflict of people in the area trying to shut down the Suez Canal, the English would have a friendly zone, an area where they could go and have a base of operations to protect the building of the Suez Canal. That's what started this whole thing. There weren't any Jews to speak of in that part of the world since the Roman occupation, where they had the diaspora and they sent them all out of there. And that was like 1,000 years. Well, no, almost 2,000 years before that. So, in almost 2,000 years, there was no Jewish presence, no Jewish homeland, no Jewish territory in what is presently Israel. Now, that's historical. Not going back to something that happened in 1998, but something that happened in 1860. That's historical. And then from there on, you go forward, you fast forward to see that more and more Jews moving into that area, conflict arising because of the people who wanted to have a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state. Really sort of came to a head in 1947 when the Jews really took on the English to run them out, because that was Palestine. There was British mandate Palestine at the time. And finally, Brits put their hands up and they said, we don't want any more to do with it. And the United Nations says, okay, we're gonna carve out this little piece of land, which is about half the size that Israel is today, and say, okay, this will be Israel's homeland, because there was a lot of pro-Jewish sentiment after World War II and the Holocaust, and they felt that Jews should have a place where they could go and say, this is our homeland, we could feel safe here. Well, that feeling safe here isn't working out that well, is it? So that's really the history. And then, of course, in 1948, they came up to, and this was just before the presidential election, and Truman had said, no, I'm going to veto this UN resolution. It's not healthy. It's going to be a disaster. There's no reason the Jews to have a separate country there. And that night, a whole lot of American Jewish leaders, Democrats, came to the White House and told Truman flat out, and you can check all these things, I don't just make these things up, told him right out that if you do that, we're not going to support you in the presidential election, and you'll lose. And he knew it. So the next day he changes his position and says, oh yes, we're going to support that and we're going to sign that. And then he became a big hero with American Jews ever since then, because he signed onto the creation of Israel. They ignore the fact that he did so under threat of there was a gun next to his head, proverbially. So that's kind of the history of this thing, and I grew up with that, right? And it's like there was somebody making fun of Biden saying he's older than Israel. Well, I'm older than Israel. That's right. I'm 40 years old, and Israel is 39. Yeah, that's it. So, so that's the real history. So when these people say, well, people who don't agree would support Israel's right to exist, they're just ignorant of history. Well, I'm not ignorant of history. I read history all the time. And I lived through a lot of it, a lot more than he did, including 1948. I remember that very well because Truman was running for re-election. He had appointed my dad to the status of forces prosecutions in Europe, and then Dad did a great job with that. And so then Truman arranged for Dad to be appointed to the U.S. Attorney's Office as the first assistant, which is really the boss of the office in Indiana. And then when Truman came through there, campaigning, Dad went backstage and took me with him, and I got to meet the president and so on. So I've been kind of following politics, including Israel, it's really since I was 4 years old. And I know I saw 4-year-olds' perspective, but hey, 4-year-olds can be pretty introspective. Not introspective, but perspective. I don't know what they are. Why are we talking about 4-year-olds for crying out loud? Oh yeah, because I was one once. So that's the history of this thing. It's not just, Israel has always been there. It's just an established country. No. Israel came about through violence and bloodshed from basically Zionists moving in that area, attacking the British government, blowing up the David Ben Gurion Hotel, attacking Palestinians, driving them out of their homes, driving them off their land. That's how Israel came into existence. So to sit there and say, well, Israel has a right to exist, well, I don't think it has a right to exist. I was disappointed at the time when Truman signed on to the creation of Israel as a country. It shouldn't be it's fine to create a country for somebody. It's not fine to put that country in there on the backs of the people who are already living there. And that's why there's so much anger at Israel in the Middle East, because the people in the Middle East, as far as they're concerned, for what is 100 years for them, that's like 2 minutes. So they're still living in biblical times. But those people deeply resent the Jews moving in, bringing their own religion, shoving the people who had a different religion out of there, shoving the people who were, at that time the Jews were all Europeans, shoving all of these Arab people off of their land, off their homelands, out of their vineyards, killing the people who opposed and resisted them, taking that land through force and arms. So remember, when the UN said, this is Israel, that didn't mean the UN sent troops in and set up barbed wire and everything. No, they just made the statement. They made the proclamation. And then the Zionists said, hey, this is our country. The UN said so. But the Arabs said, no, it isn't. And that was the beginning of the first major Arab-Israeli war. I do understand history, Bret. Apparently a lot more than you do. You weren't even born when all this happened. Shame on you. So that was the first thing he said, which is annoying as hell to me in this thing. Here's another thing he said. Usually I don't pay attention. I'll read these things, but this one just irritated me because it's wrong on so many levels. And this guy's writing for the New York Times. There's some other bad people, like Charles Blow. I think he's a terrible columnist, but we can talk about him at some other point in time. So, and he says, the campus protesters at Princeton chanted, We don't want no two states, we want 48. They weren't asking for Israel to accept a Palestinian state, they're demanding Israel's abolition. They're also adopting the view that the only solution to the Middle East is a final one, Israel's annihilation. Now, when you hear the term Israel's annihilation, what pops to your mind? I'll tell you what pops into my mind. It means massacring the people, going in there and killing all the Israelis to annihilate them. That's the terminology he's using. I don't know anybody that's any responsible person who's concerned about what's going on in the Middle East calling for the extermination, the annihilation, the murder of people of Israel. In my opinion, what they should be doing, and where they're going to go eventually anyway, is they should work out a deal with Israel to say, look, we're not going to defend you anymore. You get into a war with Iran and Syria and Lebanon, not to mention Gaza, you're going to lose. You're going to be wiped out because you have no way of defending yourself. And that's one thing that gets me. People say, well, Israel's a regular country. Like, no, it isn't. Is there a regular country anywhere in the world that depends for its existence entirely on another country? We pull out of Israel, we stop giving them arms, we start giving them weapons. They want us actually to go in there with when we have ships over there now, which is very scary and very dangerous, to go in there and actually engage in a war with Iran in order to protect Israel so Israel can have its right to exist. At what price? At what cost? So what they're eventually going to happen, because at some point in time the Americans are going to say, we're not doing this anymore. And you get more and more anti-Israeli feeling because of what they're doing in Gaza to those civilians over there. And you get we young people are getting sick and tired of it, and eventually we're not going to agree to support Israel, and at some point in time we're going to be the majority. And when that happens, Israel's going to disappear because it cannot exist. So what they should do, in my opinion, is accept that. Accept the fact that the creation of Israel as an independent state in the middle of a bunch of Arab states was a mistake. There is a place that Jews can go. They have a homeland already. It's the same homeland that those of us of mixed race, such as me. I'm Irish, and I found out the other day, to my great chagrin, I'm about half English. So I'm mixed race, just like, Kamala or whatever the hell her name is, Harris. She's mixed race too. Barack Obama was mixed race. Nobody ever mentioned the fact that he was half Irish. Even he tried to pretend that he was. He went over to Ireland into a pub, and they were all saluting him and welcoming him as his cousin. Then he said, I'm not really one of you. And of course, they knew he was, so they all laughed, and then he had to chuckle along with it like he was kidding, but I know he wasn't. So, admit it or not, he's half Irish. And this poor Kamala, she's half Apache, I think. They say some kind of Indian, I'm not sure which it is, but some Apache or Comanche or probably. She could be Sioux, she could be Crow. And they never say that, have you noticed that? They'll say somebody's Indian, but they never tell you the tribe. And, what a lot of people don't know this, where did she get all that money for this presidential race? Where did that come from? Well, hello, my friends. Who owns all the damn casinos in this country? Who's making all the money, except for the ones owned by the mob? Who else owns all the casino and is making tens and tens of hundreds of millions of dollars constantly? The Indians! That's right. That's why she pretends to be an Indian. I think she's Cherokee. I don't know. Whatever it is, she's an Indian that owns casinos. That's how she got all her money. You heard it here for the first time, and it's true, or I wouldn't have said it. So, but let's go. How did we get started talking about Kamala Harris? I don't know, and I don't care. So, but there is a place where there is a homeland for the Jews, and it's the same homeland we Irish have. It's the same. It's called the United States of America. Bring them back home here. It's not a coincidence the greatest people in this country are Jews, and this is uncontroverted fact. This is pure fact. Who is the most beloved American who ever lived? Ever. And I'm including George, what's his name in there? Washingtonian or something. Come on, you know who it is. The most beloved, the most patriotic, the greatest American that ever lived. Larry David, and he's a Jew. So there you have it. But in all seriousness, they could bring them back here. They could start evacuating Jews from Israel instead of acting like it's a country that's always been a country. And I don't say that with any joy, because I've known lots of Israeli Jews. When I was with a patent attorney with Intel, I had a lot of clients in Israel. And these were computer technology and hardware and making of chips, and they were brilliant people and really nice people, and I really liked them. And there are lots of fine, wonderful people in Israel. They've actually developed a pretty amazing society there. But unless they get this Palestinian thing worked out, they're gonna eventually disappear. And so when you're saying that Jews have a right to defend themselves and a right to exist, and that means, because this is what Netanyahu is saying, that means they have a right to go in and kill as many Palestinians in Gaza as they see fit, because Israel has a right to defend itself. And this is something else that Stephen says in this article. He says, well, people say Israel has a right to defend itself, and they complain about all these people being killed. But he says, if I can find this. He says this is not. I'm reading this breaking. This is not a demand that people turn off their brains when it comes to judging Israel's behavior, says Bret. On the contrary, it is a request that they turn their brains on. To wit, how exactly do the people who say Israel has the right to defend itself propose to do so against an army that entrenches itself beneath civilians in hundreds of miles of tunnels? That's strategy for lawful urban warfare against an enemy that fights unlawfully from hospitals, mosques, and homes. So what he's saying is, so, yeah, Israel's killing tens of thousands of Gazans, most of whom are children. It's okay because look at how bad these Hamas people are, and they are bad. They're in tunnels underneath hospitals and mosques and homes. Yeah, but those tunnels are not in Israel. Flip the switch. Let us presuppose that these tunnels were into Jerusalem. That somehow these people had been able to work themselves into a situation where they had a network of tunnels under Jerusalem. And they're in there. And they're not coming out popping and shooting at the Israelis. They're just hiding in there. Because that's what they were doing, guys. They were just hiding. And it turns out these people came over here and they did this horrible thing on October 7th, which was horrible. And then they ran back and hid in these tunnels, and went back to Gaza, hid in the tunnels. The tunnels then lead into and under Jerusalem. And that's where they're all hiding. You think that Netanyahu would give the order to bomb the hell out of Jerusalem in order to get at these people hiding in those tunnels? Think about it. Can you imagine Netanyahu saying, well, they're fighting unlawfully, they're hiding under civilians. Gotta go sometime. So he then says, yeah, go ahead. Start bombing Jerusalem. We'll bomb these people out of there. We'll get them out of there. We'll kill them, and that's our objective. But Mr. Prime Minister, you will kill tens of thousands of Jews, including Jewish children, way more than were killed in that October assault by the Hamas. You're going to kill a whole lot of Jews, a whole lot of our own people to get those people. Do you think he would have said, that's okay, my people will understand because, hey, Israel has a right to defend itself? He would never do that. And yet, it's okay to do that to the civilians. These aren't soldiers they're killing, and when they drop these bombs, these are civilians, most of whom are children. Because he doesn't care, because they're not Jews. You wonder why they hate him? The answer is, you don't have to go in there and drop bombs on those people and kill them in their tunnels. Find another way. Or wait for them to come out again. Or do what you should have done in the first place, was prevent them from coming across. You supposedly have all this great intelligence. Why don't you use it? I mean, we can go into detail on that, but they were told like, oh, well, a year ahead of time that this thing was on the works, and then after they came in and this whole thing started, it took them 24 hours to get any Israeli troops into that area. Why? I have my suspicion, but I don't have the facts to prove, so I'm not going to say anything. But they should have done their job in the first place, and this wouldn't have happened. They could still do that. They could set up barriers. They could keep an eye on these people. They could watch it like, they're taking out these other people by sending in, targeted attacks in Lebanon and in Iran. They could still do that with these. They don't have to go into these tunnels to get them now, today, and kill all those people in the meantime. And they've just destroyed the civilian population centers. Those people have no place to go. Now we're not hearing anything about it in the news because we're too busy looking at Donald Trump's latest insult. But those people know what's going on, and they're still suffering horribly because of what Netanyahu is doing, because the Jews have a right to existence, they have a right to defend themselves, they have a right to go in wherever is necessary to get Hamas, and it doesn't matter who gets killed in the first place. They're like bank robbers and going in a bank and taking a bunch of hostages, and the chief of police says, oh man, this is a bad situation. We got a bank robber and a bunch of hostages, so let's try to negotiate with this guy, and where's our hostage negotiator? And somebody else said, just go in and blow the crap out of him. We can't do that, we'll kill the hostages. So, it's not our fault, it's the bank robbers who are responsible, because they're the ones hiding behind the hostages, so go in there and kill everybody. That's essentially what he's doing. And it's wrong. So, the United States should do is say, look, you don't retaliate against Iran, because if Iran retaliates against you, you turn around and retaliate against Iran, and it looks like it's going to be a full-blown war that you can't possibly win, you're on your own. We are not going to get involved in a war in Iran, and by extension, possibly eventually into a war with Russia, because you can't defend yourself. You should have thought of that before you started going into these tunnels and blowing the hell out of people in Gaza and sending bombs into Syria and sending bombs into Lebanon and sending bombs into Iran. You should have thought about that. We're not going to do that. We will do something. That's why we have all the ships out there, because we are going to protect Israel's right to exist, and whether I like it or not, that's our policy, and it's been the policy of every administration we've had since Truman. So that's going to happen. But I'm just simply saying, in terms of like what Bret is talking, he's talking through his arse, as we say in England. So you should read this. It's called Israel Confronted with 5 Wars in 1. Then he mocks people who, for example, there's a lot of Jews in this country who are very much opposed to what he's Netanyahu, and he says, he makes fun of those people, he calls them the as a Jew Jews. As a Jew, I feel that, well, yeah, you know what? As a Jew in this country, most of whom, not by coincidence, are Democrats, you care a lot about morality, and you care a lot about fairness, and you care a lot about people in Gaza getting the crap blown out of them because of Netanyahu. You care about those things, and you're a Jew, and you have a right to say, as a Jew, I don't like what these people are doing over here, and I don't approve. Just like I, as an Irishman, didn't approve of the IRA sending bombs off in cars and in shopping centers in England. Just because somebody is related to your ethnic group doesn't mean you're supposed to approve everything they do. That's not even true in families. But don't get me started on why my family disapproves of me. I think they're just jealous. Right, Francois Pierre? No, he's asleep. Let's speak. You remember what Jesus said? Let sleeping dogs lie. No, that was Netanyahu who said that. No, Netanyahu didn't say that. He should have said it. But enough. I've babbled on and on, and maybe none of this makes any sense to you. Probably doesn't. I'm not even sure it makes sense to me. But I think Bret Stephens is wrong, and he constantly sounds that theme. And of course now so does Donald Trump. So it's not going to end well. And we get sucked into it. And every time there's a chance of being sucked into a major war these days, it also means you get sucked into a thermonuclear war. And that's the end of this race we call human. And on that note, I hope you have a great Sunday. Bye.